Hey everyone, it's Cassie, and I have gotten some requests for a watercolor snowman tutorial. So today we're going to be watercoloring a snowman from the Hedgehog Hollow October stamp kit. I will have links in the description below for all the products I'm using. I've already stamped the image on some Bristol smooth paper using Ink on 3 Fade Out ink. This is the ink I normally use for my no-line watercoloring. I'm going to be using some Zig Clean Color Real Brush markers, as well as a silver black velvet 8 round paintbrush. I also have a paper towel, some clean water, and a ceramic plate. Now you know what I'm using, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start by working on the snow. Because it's a white area, we want to get that done first. I'm working with a 904. This is a lovely light gray color with a lot of blue in it. I'm just adding a little bit of ink to my shadow areas. You don't want to go heavy-handed with this, keep it very light. We are working on a white snow, but we do need to define the shapes because we don't have a line, we need to define it with our shadows. I also spread some ink onto my ceramic plate for picking up the color later. I'm now using my paintbrush, dipped in a little bit of clean water, to blend that color out. Keep in mind that you want your darkest color where your shadows are, and you want it to be almost white where your highlights are. To add a little more dimension and definition, you can pick up some color from your plate and add that to your image. If you find that your image gets too dark, go ahead and blot it with your paper towel to help pick up some of that excess ink. I've found that it works best to work in light layers and slowly build your color instead of trying to get all your color down at once. This is why I'm kind of working back and forth, adding a little, taking a little away. You want to just work in those light layers so that you have full control over how dark this gets. I like to work in sections, so now I'm done with his belly, I'm moving on to his head. This also gives your previous sections a chance to dry so you can get a better idea of what it really looks like, because it does slightly change as it dries. So go ahead and keep building in your shadows slowly, adding a little bit of ink at a time. For his cheeks, I'm using a little bit of 069 on the plate. I don't want to put it directly onto that snowman, it'll be a little bit too dark if you do that. Going from the plate keeps it nice and light. If you haven't noticed already, I do have the color numbers up on the upper right hand side of the screen, and I will change that back and forth as I'm changing my colors so you always know what I'm doing. For his smile, I want to start by adding some shadows underneath his cheek, and then I'll go in with the marker directly to draw that smile line. I don't want that line to be too harsh, so after I've used the marker, I'll go ahead and soften that line with a little bit of water. Again, if it gets too dark or you have too much water on there, you can blot it with your paper towel. Now that our belly area is completely dry, we can add in our feet. I'm starting by laying down a little bit of ink at the bottom of the foot. I'm keeping my highlights at the top of the foot where the body is so that it's easily defined from the body. That back foot can be a little bit darker than the body because it's underneath. I know this looks really dark for snow right now, but give it time, it will look better, I promise. Next, I'm going to go in and add some eyes with my 902. And I'm going to soften them out just a little bit. This will help keep the eyes looking really soft like everything else instead of being really harsh black dots. I also decided to put just a little bit of shadow underneath the eye as if the eyes are pressed into the snow. And I'll soften that out very carefully. You don't want to get that black wet again. So I'm just adding that little bit of shadow to give it some dimension. Next, we're going to move on to his hat. I want it to be a fur-lined hat, but because that is a white on a white, I'm going with a warmer gray. So I'm using my 901. I'm going to do the same thing I did with the snow, just putting in a little bit of ink in my darkest shadow areas and blending that out, and then picking up a little bit off the plate if I need to add a little bit more color. So I'm going to go ahead and add that to both the trim of his hat and the little bobble on top. I'm going to go ahead and go back and make that just a little bit darker in those shadow areas. I know that I'm going to be adding some white on top of this, so I can make this white a little bit darker than I would typically make it if I wasn't going to add white ink on top. For the hat and the scarf, I want them to be pink, so I'm starting with a 069, and I'm adding a little bit of ink to my darkest areas and then blending that out. Right now, I'm not worried too much about getting deep shadows. I'm just trying to get the basic shape. Again, if you need to add a little bit of color, add from the plate so you have more control. I'm working in sections and letting the different sections dry. You'll notice I skipped over that middle section to work one end and then the other. Then I'll go back to that middle section when both ends are dry. This will keep your lines nice and tight instead of bleeding into each other. To add more definition to my shadows, I'm going in with a little 230. I'm working from the plate and not the marker. I don't want this to get too dark. I just want to add more color into my shadows and build them up a little bit. I want my buttons to be green, but I want them to be a muted green. So I'm going to do an underpainting of gray first. So I'm using my 901 and adding in a base layer of gray. Then I'll go over top of that with my 046 marker. Again, adding just a little bit of color to that shadow and blending it out. This little guy has a heart on his tummy, so I'm going to use some 230 to paint that little heart in. I'm not too worried about definition on this heart. It's really tiny, so I'm just getting some color on there. Next, we're going to work on his carrot nose. I'm starting with a 060, and I'm adding just a little bit and spreading that out. Then working from the plate, I'll add a little bit of highlight using the 070. And I'm going to keep working back and forth between those two colors to get the color that I want on that nose. I'll add in my details with the 060, then soften that out with a little bit of water, and that will finish the nose. For his arms, I'm working with a 068, adding in a little bit of color and then blending that out with my water. I do want these sticks to be a little bit darker, so I am adding more ink than I have been adding to the other things. However, I'm still working in layers so I don't get too dark too fast. For our details, I'm using some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White ink. And then I have just a metal pokey tool. You can use whatever you have on hand. I'm just dipping that into that white ink and doing a little dot on the eyes. I like using the bleed proof ink because it won't reactivate the watercolor, so you'll get a nice white dot instead of it picking up some of that color underneath. At this point, I decided the scarf needed a little bit more dimension to it, so I'm adding in some little triangles with the 069 and then softening that out, and that will give it that folded look. To add details to the fur, I'm going to use a 000 brush, a little bit of water, and the bleed proof white ink. I'm just adding little tiny stroke marks along the edge of the hat to give it a fluffy look. It shows up even better in that darker area, which is why we put that down. You could also put some little lines in the middle of the hat as well. Just want to give it that kind of fluffy texture of fur. I'm doing that to the little pom-pom on top as well. For the finishing details, I'm adding the buttonholes with a 091. And I'm adding the little stitched line on the buttons with a 902. And our adorable snow baby is done. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. If you have ideas for future watercolor tutorials you want to see, be sure to leave me a comment so that I know what you guys want. I have links in the description below for the products I used, as well as other places you can find me on social media, including my blog and Instagram. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.